Joseph Golding's Last Christmas, author unknown, read in English. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. It was very strange, thought old Joseph Golding, that he couldn't be master of his own mind. He had lived a great many years, and neither remorse nor memory had ever been in the habit of disturbing him. But now it seemed to him as if the very foundations of his life were breaking up. He was well through his day's work. He had dined comfortably. He sat in an easy-chair in a luxurious drawing-room whose crimson hangings shut out the still cold of the December afternoon. He had nothing to do but enjoy himself. Mr. Golding liked to enjoy himself at this season as much as others did, for it was Christmas Eve. What though he was in the habit of spending it solitarily, he liked solitude, perhaps because nothing more lively came in his way, and he was too shy and proud to look out for it. For many a year on Christmas Eve he had sat balancing in his mind the great accounts presented in his ledgers, the accumulating coffers at his bankers, the strokes of business he would make in future. Not so now. The year was drawing to a close. Some intruding voice kept whispering that in like manner so was his career. He could not put it from him, try as he would. The voice reminded him of a coming time when his life's work would be all done, even as his day's work was all done now, when he would be ready to sit down in the evening and look over the balance sheet of his deeds, good and evil. Curiously, the old days came trooping in slow procession before him, and he had been able to forget them for so very long. His dead wife. He had not loved her much when she was with him, but how vivid was his memory of her now. He could see her moving round the house, noiseless as a shadow, never intruding on him after he had once or twice repulsed her gruffly, but going on her own meek, still ways, with her face growing whiter every day. He began to understand, as he looked back, why her strength had failed, and she had been ready, when her baby came, to float out on the tide and let it drift her into God's haven. She had had enough to eat and to drink, but he saw now that he had left her heart to starve. Heaven, what a hard man he had been! He seemed to see her white, still face as he looked at it the last time before they screwed down the coffin lid, with the dumb reproach frozen on it, the eyes that would never plead vainly any more, closed for ever. He recalled how passionately the 3-days-old baby had cried in another room just at that moment, moving all the people gathered together for the funeral with a thrill of pity for the poor little motherless morsel. She was a passionate, wilful baby, all through her babyhood. He remembered that. She wanted, missed without knowing what the lack was, the love and sustenance which her mother would have given her, and protested against fate with all the might of her infant lungs. But as soon as she grew old enough to understand how useless it was, she had grown quiet too, just like her mother. He recalled her all through her girlhood, a shy, still girl, always obedient and submissive, but never drawing very near him. Why? Because he would have repulsed her as he repulsed her mother. He could see it now. It was very strange these facts should come back to him today, and their naked truth with them. He had been a cold, hard, ungenial man, without sympathy for any one human being, absorbed utterly in the pursuit of money-making. and so the child Amy had grown up in shadow without him. But suddenly, when she was 18, the old passionate spirit that had made her cry so when a baby must have awakened again, he thought, for she fell in love then and wished to marry in defiance of his wishes. He remembered her standing proudly before him after one of their quarrels, where he had been harsh and bitter and abusive of the man she wanted to call husband. She had borne in silence reproach of herself, but not of him who had become to her as her best existence. Her words came back to the old man now. "Father, do you know anything against Harry Church?"
"Yes," he had answered wrathfully. "I know that he is as poor as Job was when he sat among the ashes. He cannot keep a wife as a daughter of mine must be kept."
"Anything else, father?" looking him steadily in the eye.
"No, that's enough," he had thundered. "I'll tell you, besides, that if you marry him you must lie in the bed you'll make. My doors will never open to you again. Never."
He met with a will as strong as his own that time. She did marry him, and went away with him from her father's house. Mr. Golding had known the day the wedding was to take place, and disdained to stop it. He washed his hands of Harry Church and of Amy, his wife. She wrote home afterwards, over and over again, but Mr. Golding sent all the letters back unopened. Subsequent to that they disappeared from the town, and he had never heard what became of them. It was at least 10 years ago now. It seemed very strange that these things should have come back to-night to haunt him, and with a wild remorse, a pitying regret. He had done nothing to recall them. Could it be his sense of failing health that brought them? If so, what sort of anguish might he not look for as he drew nearer and nearer to the ending? He began to wish that he knew what had been in those rejected letters, whether Amy had been suffering for anything that money could supply. The next thought that struck him was why he had opposed the marriage so virulently. It is true Harry Church had been but a clerk in his own employ, but he was a well-educated gentleman, and would rise with time. Faithful, intelligent, persevering, respected, but poor. In that last word lay the head and front of Harry Church's offending. He, Joseph Golding, was rich then, he was far richer now. But he could not help asking it, what special good were his riches bringing him? He was an old man, the span of life running quickly on, and he was all alone. Who would take his gold then? He could not carry it along with him. All in a moment he saw it clearly. The dreadful truth stood naked and bare. His life and its object had been mistaken ones. "All alone, all alone," he kept saying to himself in a sort of vague self-pity. "I've toiled and worked for naught." But during this time, even now as he sat there, a message of love was on its way to him. Perhaps heaven had but been preparing his heart to receive it. He heard a ring at the doorbell, heard it without paying attention to it. Rings were nothing to him. People did not come on business to his residence, and of visitors he expected none. Down went his head, lower and lower, with its weight of thought. Meanwhile, 2 people were admitted into the hall below, a man and a little girl. The man had the appearance of a staid, respectable servant. He took off the child's warm cloak and hood, and she stood revealed, a dainty, delicate creature of some 8 years old, her golden curls drooping softly round her face, with its large blue eyes and its cherry lips. The admitting maid, not knowing what to make of this, called Mr. Golding's housekeeper, old Mrs. Osgood. The latter went into a tremor as she came forward and looked at the face. "It's Miss Amy's child," she exclaimed to the man nervously. "I couldn't mistake the likeness."
Miss Amy's that was, he answered. Mrs. Harry Church she has been this many a year.
"I know. It is as much as my place is worth to admit any child of hers here."
"You are Mrs. Osgood!" exclaimed the little girl. "Mamma said I should be sure to see you."
"Here's a blessed lamb! And so she remembers me."
"She talks of you often. She says you were always kind to her. Nobody but you loved her."
"Well, I did love her. The old house has never been the same since she went out of it. What's your name, my pretty one?"
"Amy."
"Amy," repeated the housekeeper, lifting her hands as if there were some wonder in it.
"And mamma said you would let me go up alone to grandpapa."
"And so you shall," decided Mrs. Osgood after a minute's hesitation. "I won't stand in the way of it, let master be as angry with me as he will. He is up in the drawing room all by himself." The man sat down to wait, and the child went up alone. Opening the door, she went softly in, not speaking. Perhaps the stern-looking old man sitting there with bent head awed her to silence. Joseph Golding, waking up from his deep reverie, saw a letter held out to him. He took it mechanically, supposing its messenger, hidden behind his large chair, was one of his waiting maids. With a singular quickening of pulse, he recognized his daughter's writing. She had waited all these silent years, she told him, because she was determined never to write to him again until they were rich enough for him to know that she did not write from any need of his help. They had passed these 10 years in the West, and heaven had prospered them. Her husband was a rich man now, and she wanted from her father only his love, wanted only that death should not come between them, and either of them go to her mother's side without having been reconciled to the other.
"How did this come here? Who brought it?"
demanded Mr. Golding in his usual imperious manner.
"I did, grandpapa."
He sprang up at the soft, timid voice, as if some fright took him, and stared at the lovely vision, standing there like a spirit on his hearthstone, with her white face and her gleaming golden hair. Was it real? Where was he? Who could this child be? But as he looked, the likeness flashed upon him, and he grew hungry to clasp her to him. It was the little Amy of the old days grown into beauty, for Amy had never been so wondrously fair as this.
"Come here, my child. Don't be afraid. Tell me what your name is."
"Amy, grandpapa."
Another Amy. Grandpapa. He felt the sobs rising up in his heart with a great flood of emotion, but he choked them back.
"What have they told you about me?" he rejoined after a long pause. "Have they bid you hate me?"
"They always told me that you were far away toward where the sun rose, and if I were good they would bring me to see you some day. Every night I say in my prayers, 'God bless papa and mamma, and God bless grandpapa.'"
"Why didn't they bring you? What made them let you come alone?"
"Mamma sent me with John to give you the letter," was the simple answer. "The carriage is at the gate waiting for me."
"Who is John?"
"Papa's servant."
"And where are they staying?"
"At the hotel. We only got here this morning."
Mrs. Osgood, hovering in the hall, looked on in wonder. Her master was coming downstairs calling for his hat and coat, and leading the child. He got into the carriage with her and it drove away. Mr. Golding was wondering vaguely whether it were real. They arrived at last, and the child led him in, opening a door at the end of a long corridor. She spoke cheeringly.
Mamma, here's Grandpapa. He said he would come back with me.
Mr. Golding's head went off in a swim. Advancing weakness tells upon people in such moments as these. He sat down, and there were Amy's arms, his own Amy's, about his neck. Which of the two sobbed the most could not be told. Why had he never known what he lost through all those vanished years?
Father, are we reconciled at last?
I don't know, my daughter, until you tell me whether you forgive me.
There should be no talk about forgiveness, she said. You went according to your own opinion of what was right, and perhaps I was to blame too. Father, it is enough that God has brought us together again in peace. I thought that no one could resist my little Amy, least of all her grandpapa. He looked up. The child stood by silently, the firelight glittering on her golden hair, her face shining strangely sweet. He put out his arms and drew her into them close, where no child, not even his own, had ever nestled before. Oh, how much he had missed in life! He knew it now. He felt her clinging hold round his neck. Her kisses dropped upon his face like the pitying dew from heaven. And he, was it himself or another soul in his place?
Father, see!
Amy's voice had a full, cheerful ring in it. Her married life had been happy. Mr. Golding turned at the call.
Here are Harry and the boys waiting to speak to you,
she said in a less assured tone. He shook his son-in-law's hand heartily. Old feuds, old things were over now, and all was become new. In his heart, until that trouble came, he had always liked Harry Church. Then he looked at the two boys, brave, merry little fellows, of whom he might be proud. Explanations ensued. Fortune had favoured Mr. Church. They had come back for good, and were already looking out for a house.
No house but mine,
interrupted Joseph Golding.
It will want a tenant when I am gone. You must come home tomorrow.
Tomorrow will be Christmas Day, said his daughter half doubtingly.
All the better. If Christmas was never kept in my house, it shall be now. I shall not live to see another, Amy.
She looked up at the changed thin face, and could not contradict him. Someone going out to the West Indies had told them how Joseph Golding was breaking. The news had caused them to hurry home prematurely. Amy said to her husband that if her father died unreconciled to her, she should be full of remorse for ever.
You will come home tomorrow, all of you, repeated Mr. Golding. And mind, Amy, you do not go away again.
But if the children should be too much for you, father?
When they are, I'll tell you,
he said, with a touch of the former gruffness.
The old house is large enough.
He went out and found his way to the shops, open to the last on Christmas Eve in the old town, looking for Christmas gifts. New work for him, but he entered into it earnestly. Perambulating the streets like a bewildered Santa Claus, he went home laden with books and toys and jewels and bonbons. Mrs. Osgood lifted her hands and thought the end of the world must be coming.
Help me to put these things away, Osgood. Don't stare as if you were moonstruck. And look here, there'll be company to dinner tomorrow. Mind you send in a good one.
The best that ever was seen on a table, master. If it's for them, I think it may be for.
Well, it is. Miss Amy's coming home again.
Heaven be praised, sir! The house has been but a dull one since she left it."
"They are all coming, and they will not go away again, Osgood. If you want more servants, you can get them."
"It's the best Christmas box you could have given me, master." And they came. Amy and Amy's husband and the pretty boys were there, and best of all, the sweet little girl with the golden hair sitting next to grandpapa. It was too happy a party for loud mirth. And among them Joseph Golding saw, or fancied he saw, another face, over which almost 30 years ago he had watched the grave-sod piled. A face sad and wistful no longer, but bright with a strange glory. Close over beyond him she seemed to stand, and he heard, or fancied that he heard, a whisper from her parted lips, though it might have come only from his own heart. Peace on earth and good will toward men. End of Joseph Golding's Last Christmas. Read by Ruth Golding. Christmas 2015.